What if you could own a franchise that teaches one of life's most important skills that a child can learn? Goldfish Swim School has built an empire on teaching kids to swim in beautiful and tropical-themed facilities with warm water pools and top-notch instruction. And with over 150 locations across North America and average revenues exceeding $2 million per location, it looks like a winner on paper. And in addition to that, I was a swimmer growing up, so I'm naturally drawn to businesses in this space. But when I dig into the economics and the risk profile of Goldfish Swim School, the risk-return calculus just isn't there for me in 2026. In this video, I'll walk through 3 specific reasons why I wouldn't buy a Goldfish franchise and where I would invest instead. If it's your first time here, welcome! I'm Groce. I'm a franchise owner and a franchise consultant, and I love helping people find the right franchise for them. So for more franchise insights and to work with me directly, you can click the link below in the description. So the Goldfish Swim School story starts in 2006, and that's when Chris and Jenny McQueeston were frustrated trying to find quality swim lessons for their own kids in Birmingham, Michigan. Everywhere they looked, the options were disappointing because most swim lessons were happening in cold and overcrowded community pools or in hotel facilities where you had no control over the environment. Classes were too big, the instruction was inconsistent at best, and the whole experience felt more like a chore than something that kids would actually enjoy. And so they decided to build something different. And in 2006, they opened the first Goldfish Swim School with a radical new concept. They created a dedicated and purpose-built facility specifically designed for teaching kids to swim. 90-degree water temperature, warm enough for even the youngest kids to feel comfortable, and a tropical theme that made it fun and engaging, and small class sizes with a 4-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio. And most importantly, they had a proprietary curriculum that was based on child development and water safety research. And the name Goldfish itself was perfect because it was playful, memorable, and immediately signaled that this was a kid-focused brand. And the concept resonated immediately with parents because unlike traditional swim programs where you're working around someone else's schedule and someone else's facilities, Goldfish offered a premium, consistent experience. And parents knew exactly what they were getting every time they walked in the door. And by 2009, the McQueestons decided to franchise the concept, and that growth was explosive. Goldfish tapped into something powerful, and that was parents' willingness to invest in their children's safety and development. Learning to swim isn't just a nice-to-have skill, because it's literally life-saving, and drowning is one of the leading causes of death for young children, so parents don't think twice about paying for quality swim instruction. The franchise model made sense because the operational systems were highly replicable. You had standardized facility design, proven curriculum, and established vendor relationships for pool equipment and maintenance, and a marketing playbook that worked. And so by the mid-2010s, Goldfish was expanding rapidly across the United States and into Canada. And today there are over 150 locations across North America. The brand has become synonymous with premium children's swim instruction. But despite the brand's success, investing in a Goldfish Swim School franchise today comes with some challenges and risks that keep me from diving in. Pun intended. And that brings me to the first reason that I wouldn't buy a Goldfish Swim School franchise, and that is the build-out cost. The build-out cost for a Goldfish Swim School is astronomical. And according to their franchise disclosure document, you're looking anywhere from a $1.7 million investment to the highest one was $7.5 million. And it appears that that one was in New York. All of that to open one location. It does appear that most fall somewhere in the range of $2 million to $4 million. As I always say, like a higher build-out isn't inherently a deal breaker. Obviously, if you have the capital, the earnings just have to justify that investment. And sometimes you would rather invest more so that you can drive more cash flow from the same 4 walls of a business because it makes things simpler operationally. You only need 1 manager to oversee that business versus 3 or 4 if you were to invest the same amount of capital into a lower cost franchise and have multiple different units. But the trade-off of that is that when you invest that amount of capital into one single location, you have significantly more risk attributed to that one facility rather than if you had taken the other option and invested into more units that were less capital intensive to start, where the risk was diversified and you could have, one loser out of 4 or 5 locations, and if the others are strong, it helps to absorb that. But what really concerns me about the higher build-out cost in this specific situation is that the landlord has you buy the you-know-what. Because when you think about it, you're literally, again, building a swimming pool in a strip mall. You're doing that multi-million-dollar build-out that is completely specialized to you and your business. The landlord's going to know that. They know what you've invested. It's publicly disclosed in the FDD. They can look it up. And so let's say you sign a 10-year lease with this landlord. What do you think happens when you come around in year 10 to renegotiate that lease? When the landlord knows how much you've sunk into this business, literally sunk costs, the most literal sense of the word, they can go look again at the FDD. They know what it's costing you, what it would cost you to go build that pool in another location. So they know exactly the economics that work into the decision matrix you're facing between, do I just pay whatever the rent increase the landlord's going to impose on me and suck it up, or is it worth going and building a different pool in a different location for another, again, multiple seven figures? And are all landlords going to take advantage of this and, ask some unreasonable amount? I don't know, but I don't like giving other people the opportunity to have that kind of leverage over me if I can avoid that. And so whenever I'm looking at a brick and mortar location, or a brick and mortar business rather, I want a situation where there's a wider array of spaces that would be suitable. And this is not necessarily because I have the intention to relocate the business, because moving in a business like this tends to be disruptive to the business, but just so that you have options, so that the landlords don't have as much leverage over you when the time comes to renegotiate leases. So reason number 2, looking at Goldfish Swim Schools, they have pretty high fixed operating expenses on a number of accounts. And when you combine high operating expenses with revenue volatility, it creates a very challenging financial situation. And so let's first talk about the operating expenses, because by operating expenses, I'm talking about expenses that you would incur even if your business's revenue went to zero. And we have, I'll talk about in a second, an example of what happened with Goldfish during COVID. Regardless of whether or not you're driving any revenue, whether or not there are people walking through your doors, these are expenses that you're going to incur. Rent is a classic example of this. And rent in this specific scenario is going to be very high because you need a significant amount of square footage to have enough to build a freaking swimming pool. So then you've got utilities, right? Obviously a lot of water, a lot of electricity, because you're heating a large body of water. That's not cheap. Pool maintenance. A pool is not a cheap thing to maintain in a facility. There's a lot of upkeep. There's a lot of, filtration systems, the pump, renovations that need to happen every few years. And then there's insurance. I mean, insurance in a business like this has got to be absolutely astronomical because you're working with children in and around water, zero tolerance for safety issues. And so insurance companies are probably going to be pretty reluctant to take you on. And the few that will, they know that they have leverage and they're going to charge you accordingly. Operating expenses are just a part of doing business, and every business is going to have them. But what makes Goldfish particularly challenging is that these are high fixed costs that meet revenue volatility, because there is some seasonality in the swim school business, because summer is obviously the most prevalent month for swimming, but that's also the month where there are more options. There are more community pools that are open. There are more outdoor options that are available. You might peak in the spring when parents are getting their kids ready for summer, and then, maybe you peak in the fall as well, but you got to account for the summer when there are more options. You have to account for the holidays when people are traveling and not doing business. There's going to be seasonal volatility that comes with revenue. But the even bigger concern is a massive disruption to revenue, like I said, like COVID, when they had to shut down, and they could furlough their staff, but they couldn't furlough their insurance provider or their landlord or the utility company. These bills continue to keep coming. Whenever you have high fixed operating expenses, it means that you're much more vulnerable to any revenue volatility that you face. If operating expenses were lower and your revenue took a nosedive, again, you could cut your variable expenses and you'd be in a better position to weather that storm. But that's not the case with Goldfish. Now let's talk about reason number 3, and that is that if I wanted to own a swim instruction business, I just think that there are better franchise opportunities out there and there are better operating models. I would gravitate more towards types of swim school businesses that don't require you to build your own pool. Like I mentioned, from hotels and gyms, universities, community centers, stuff like that. Now, that is the complete anathema of Goldfish's thesis. Their entire thesis was we are going to deploy the capital to build our own pools, and that way we don't have to deal with utilizing somebody else's facility. And they get more brand loyalty because the facilities are branded beautifully. They control the temperature and the environment, which is a big deal when you're working with kids. And the revenue numbers that we see validate this approach, because like I mentioned, Goldfish's average revenue is just over $2 million per location. And meanwhile, if we look towards the alternative models that I'm talking about, their biggest competitor has an average revenue per location of just under $500,000 a year. But that alternative model, their startup costs are between $122,000 and $168,000. So yes, a Goldfish Swim School drives about 4 to 5 times the revenue as the alternative competitors who don't build pools out. And so that thesis came true. But to what expense, right? You're talking about anywhere from 15 to 50 times more expensive to build out and get that business started than their competitors. We can think about that math for a second. It's not an apples to apples comparison because Goldfish is a bigger business, and bigger businesses are going to have different requirements in terms of the owner's level of involvement, and they're going to have a different exit profile when it comes time to sell the business, and profit margins will differ as well. So you can't just blindly look at that ratio, but in this case, it's so drastic that if I was going to open a swim school franchise, I would want to open the one that doesn't require building out a multi-million-dollar facility. I also don't like being in situations where your competitors' costs are significantly less than yours are. I learned this lesson personally in the pressure washing franchise that I used to own because I had invested six figures into this business, but I still found myself competing with teenagers who had invested $100. In this case, it would make me very uncomfortable as a Goldfish franchisee when I know that my competitors have a lot more flexibility than I do. Their risk in that business investment overall is lower than I do. They have significantly lower operating expenses than I do because if a location works out or doesn't work out, they can just pivot without having to, again, invest millions of dollars sunk into specialized build-outs. So with all of this said, I don't want to sound like I'm bearish on the industry overall because I'm actually pretty bullish on youth enrichment services in general. I think it's a great industry for the right people in the right market, and parents are spending more than they ever have on their children's development. Swim instruction hits that sweet spot of being both enriching for the child as well as essential for safety. The fundamentals of this business are strong. You have recurring revenue, you have relatively inelastic demand because parents are going to prioritize swim lessons even in tough economic times, and it's a service that requires in-person instruction, which is obviously less likely to be disrupted by technology or AI alternatives. But what I look for instead are franchise opportunities in the space that have better unit economics because of a lower build out. They have more flexibility on location and just overall better risk-adjusted returns when you look at the likely scenarios. Whether it is a swim school model that uses a rental model, or it's another youth enrichment franchise that have similar economics and customer loyalty, but there are plenty of options that don't require you to literally build out a swimming pool in a strip mall and give your landlord permanent leverage over your business. If you're interested in youth enrichment franchises or other opportunities, and you have at least $100,000 of liquid capital to invest, I'd be happy to help you find the right franchise for you. You can click the link in the description to book a one-on-one strategy call with me to get started. And as always, please do like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment letting me know what franchise you would like to hear about next.